In this day and age, the ability to learn quickly is fundamental to achieving. Today we look at the strategies Tony Robbins uses to learn fast. If you find today's video helpful and would like to watch more like this, please like, share and consider subscribing to the channel. So you have to learn something and you want to learn it fast. Now, I'm not talking about regurgitating knowledge, which is often what we see from students in school today, but I'm talking about learning in the truest sense, which is developing understanding as well as knowledge and being able to apply it. Now, before we begin, what is learning? Well, the simple definition as Tony Robbins describes it is it's a creation of a relationship. This relationship comes between what we know and understand already with what we don't, or the unknown. So now that we understand better what it is to learn, how do we go from there to developing a strategy to learn faster? Well, first and foremost, we need to find ways of learning effectively, which is by developing relationships between what you know with what you don't. I mean, have a think about it. How did you understand some of the most complex problems we understand in the world today? It's by correlation, right? We understand the nature of gravity because Isaac Newton was sat in his garden when an apple fell on his head. It's hard to explain gravity to someone who wouldn't understand it, but by saying it's the force which made the apple fall down on his head, we immediately understand what the person is referring to when speaking about gravity. Now let's stick with Newton. For the physicists, if you see a principal formula of F equals m times a, then you know that it's the equation to calculate force. Now for the layman, this formula might not mean much, and for those who have little understanding or knowledge of the sciences, they may struggle to comprehend this idea. Now, if I explain that force, or F, is equal to mass, or m, times acceleration, or a, then many more will have a greater understanding of the formula, right? After all, while we may not understand the abbreviations that the physicists use, those who have had a full education are likely to understand the definitions of force, mass, and acceleration. However, what if I never finish school and I'm trying to understand the equation to calculate force? What can I do to understand force? Well, you can create a relationship that people can understand. One such example is if you have a boxer, the power or the force of his punch depends on two factors. The first is the size and weight of his fist and arm, which is the mass. The second is how fast his arm accelerates from his body to his opponent. Now, this is an example we can all understand. We know by basic human nature that the bigger someone is, the more potential weight and power they have. But we also know that if they don't move or move slowly, that weight won't generate power. The boxer's punch is powerful because, first, they're heavy and so have weight behind the punches. And second, they can strike with pace. And you see here how we have found a way of understanding a law of physics in a way which anyone can understand. And not only do we understand it, but we have a way of going from that theory to applying it in practical terms by doing punching demonstration. You see, by creating relationships between what we know, the human body, and what we don't, the law of physics, we're able to understand the law in a way which makes sense to us. This is also a great indicator of the ability of a teacher. Notice how many of the great teachers are considered relatable. They're great because of this trait, because they're able to explain something that might be complex and hard to understand in a way which students can understand in a way that's relatable to them. So the first and possibly most critical step is to create relationships.
Whenever you learn something, all you're really doing is creating a relationship between two things. So if I want to learn something, how do I learn this? It's not figuring things out. That's how most of us think of learning. Learning is not figuring things out. Learning is the creation of a relationship between two things. Something you already know, the known. Something you already know, it's in your head already, you understand it. And a relationship between the known and the, what would you guess? The unknown. Because the minute you link something you understand to something you don't understand, you now understand what you didn't understand.
To really sink this in, let's go through one more example in an area many struggle with and yet everyone should know in today's world. And that's the basic definition of binary, the principle on which all computers traditionally work. So the definition of binary is relating to, using or denoting a system of numerical notation that has 2 rather than 10 as the base. Now, I bet many of you are thinking, what is this guy talking about? What I explained is the fundamental principle behind how computers work, yet to most it will make little to no sense. Now, if I tell you to learn binary and give you that as the material to learn, it's pointless because you won't understand binary even though you might learn to regurgitate that definition. However, let's say instead you have a bag of marbles, with some marbles being red and others being blue. Now you can lay different patterns of marbles to provide different meanings, so a red marble alone might make the letter A. A red marble then followed by a blue marble might make the letter B. And a combination of a red marble followed by two blue marbles might make the letter C. It's easy to understand, making sense of how these marbles can be used to communicate, right? After all, you could lay out the marbles in your bag in various combinations to write out a message. Now, this is how binary works for computers, but rather than red and blue marbles, you have the numbers 1 and 0. And while it might take us hours to lay out red and blue marbles to write a message, a computer can organise incredible amounts of 1s and 0s in a split second, not only to write messages, but then to perform functions based on what that message says. And there you have it, the basics of Computer Science 101. You see, we relate a complex definition of something we don't know to a principal idea of something that we do know, in this case marbles. Okay, so now that we've gone through the fundamental principles of learning, how do we learn fast? Well, to put it simply, you create strategies. You see, our lives are governed by strategies, and to give it some other names that we might use, patterns, routines, or habits. Therefore, develop strategies that work for you. Now note that when others teach you the methods of learning fast, they will say to do X, Y, and Z, and you will learn anything and everything instantly. But guess what? For many of us, those methods don't work. Why? Simply put, because we're all different and therefore we all learn in different ways. Therefore, while those strategies might work for some who learn in a similar way, they don't for others. So instead, I say figure out what works for you. Are you a visual learner? Do you learn through repetition? Do you learn through practice and vocational learning? The point is, you'll have your own ways of learning. Find what works for you and build your strategy from that by applying the method of building a relationship between what you don't know and what you do.
Now, whenever you don't learn, it's because someone is trying to teach you in a different way. And the different way is, I was a good student in school. I liked learning. Until I got to junior high school, where I liked all subjects until I got to there, when math became algebra, geometry, and trigonometry. Because when I got there, I totally hated it. So I had no motivation to really learn it. And with no drive to learn something, you don't. But then secondly, since I wasn't driven, it was also the class that usually had the most homework. And if you didn't end the homework and you came in the next day, it was like being in a foreign language class. The hypotenuse of X, Y, Z over, and all I'm hearing is, my brain's searching, going, I don't know what that is. So then I would raise my hand to ask a question, which is not a good thing to do in that environment. So I'd say, well, what is a hypotenuse? And they go, oh, that you don't know? That's really like you don't know.
So let's take an example. And let's say specifically that the way you learn best is through practical learning or seeing a real life example. In this scenario, you could use a strategy of, firstly, understanding a principal idea and something you don't know yet. Let's take the idea of condensation as an example. Second, relate it to something you do understand. For example, many of us know that water vapor goes into the sky. As the air cools, it turns into water droplets causing rain. Therefore, we relate the theory of condensation to something we see in our everyday lives, in this case rain. And third, if you're a practical learner, do an experiment to get evidence and an understanding of this happening. For example, for condensation you could boil water in a kettle, from which you will see steam rising from the kettle, and then if you get a dish and hold it over to where the steam is rising, you'll see droplets form on the cooler surface of the dish where condensation occurs. And guess what? Through practical learning you've just understood the principle of condensation. And if this strategy and method of learning works, you apply it again and again and again to gain more knowledge, learn new skills, and even develop new ideas from the understanding you've developed. So go from there, learn and learn quickly. To reiterate, do this by firstly creating a relationship between the known and the unknown. Second, developing strategies of learning that work for you. Go learn in an age where learning is as easy as pressing a button, and go out there to show the world how you've grown to be the exceptional individual you are.
This morning, I want to share with you strategies, but I'll do it by using more of a known. So why don't you write down strategies real quickly as the definition was given to us when I was learning. A strategy is a set of neurological impulses organized into a specific syntax which shapes emotional, biochemical, behavioral responses to such an extent that the stimulus response is consistent. That's how they described us what strategies were. And so we were lost about halfway through the third sentence. And so what happens is when you can't figure it out, then you go in your head, you're like, I can't figure it out, what does he mean, what's going on? And then you're gone because you get out of state of being able to learn. So that's why I took 4.5 days. So I'll give you a simpler definition. A strategy is nothing but a specific way of organizing your resources. It's a specific, underline specific, it's very important, it's a specific, it isn't general. A very specific way of organizing your resources in order to, keyword, consistently get a very specific result. So it's a specific way of organizing your resources in order to consistently, not once in a while, consistently get the result you want.
So to the question of the day, what subject or skill are you working to learn quickly? Let me know in the comment section below. If you find today's video helpful and would like to watch more like this, please like, share and consider subscribing to the channel.